Next, we move on to Lova's question, which concerns legendary lives, or my irresponsible hack of legendary lives, whimsical ways. And the question is, how do you decide turn order or timing of actions? Right now, whimsical ways just does what legendary lives does for the action, although I have changed the ART, the actual percentages of the table. But that's a very good question about the ordering. And I didn't prepare for this, so let me go over here and grab my legendary lives. Unsurprisingly, full of notes and papers, having played the bejesus out of this thing over the last few years. Now, the section on combat and stuff is quite short, and I have gone into some detail over the last couple of years, talking about the nuances of specifically their confrontations. Now, in the general part of resolving things, and it even talks about fights first, so you might get the idea that this is what you do during fights. It's pragmatic rather than naturalistic, just going around to the left, to the right. Start with the player on your left. If you're the GM, just go around to the right, resolving each player's action as he comes to her. And then it says something a little odd. It says the players should sit around the table in order of their character's quickness. Okay, so the text is walking us into unnecessary alleyways. Regardless of where the players sit, don't go around to the left, just to go in order of player character quickness. So that's easy enough. And then, and that's an objective thing. It's not a roll. You just say, okay, and remember these things are rated by these numbers, and so you just go from highest quickness to lowest. That's pretty clear. When we get to all right, they're just checking its little sort of exceptional situations, none of which have to do with ties or anything. But when we get to actually fighting a little bit later, then things actually turn out to be a little bit more nuanced. First of all, one might say, well, what if the quickness is the same? And then you also have issues of what if you're trying to jump ahead, which is actually something that some characters can do. If we go to quickness as an actual ability in use, which I should have marked. You see, that was the thing. I didn't have my book out and I didn't review it, so this has taken longer. And talk about naturalistic, right? This is your naturalistic depiction of rules checking. When we get to the skills, there, and skills. I mean, they're also the abilities. You can roll those directly. Quickness itself. It is used to determine if your character can react before some event occurs. Use it to draw your weapon before your opponent, to grab an item before it falls out a window. Quickness may also be used to decide which player can act first during a turn. So that's kind of interesting. You have the idea that you can set your turn order by rolling quickness or just simply by the scores of quickness, and that's all the book says. Pragmatically, what I do is I set the order according to quickness, and then if anybody wants to mess with that and say, well, I really want to go ahead of that guy, then you're going to have a roll-off and see who gets a better score in the, a better result for their quickness. So if you're a little slower intrinsically, you put it, you get a good roll. That means you got a little lucky and were able to get in first anyway. I suppose that could be a little bit laborious. I mean, you set the order according to quickness, and then you got to ask everybody, okay, is anybody trying to go? When you come to somebody's action, you're like, by the way, is any slower person going to try to jump ahead? Okay, we'll have this roll off. That does seem a little bit clunky at the moment. That's kind of where we're at with it. And that's basically what I'm doing in Whimsical Ways, just to go with that. All right, hopefully that answered it. And exactly, those are the things that Lovo was asking about. Reading quickness in the section on how it works, it's all about rolling it. If you go and you read in the combat section, it's all about just going by the listed values. So how do you reconcile that? Well, you can in that way that I've described, but is that how they did it in play? Who knows? Or for all of my suspicion, I'll tell you my suspicion. My suspicion is that they just bagged the whole quickness thing, and they just went around from the left regardless of anything. And then if anybody objected to that and said, oh, I want to go before that, well, then they roll quickness to see how. That's my guess. That's not quite what I recommend, but reading the book, I kind of go, are you guys really? Our legalistic juxtaposition of different rules texts in different places, that's probably a reader side thing. And they just probably got the job done at the convention table. All right. Next up, this one is either going to be a very brief answer or we're going to go on for another 45 minutes. I don't know. Christopher asks, excuse me. Christopher asks, I'm fascinated by how different games, especially games written by you and Vincent, have very good and precise rules for preparation for a game. Thank you, first of all. Maybe what's in common with all of them is that they create a situation about to change or in some kind of level of desperation for all of them. If we include characters in situation, which we should, then yes, either the characters are in some sort of unstable state or the context in which the characters walk around is in some sort of unstable state. True. But the elements used are different. Well, that's true, because you see, I just named two of the ways that circumstance can obtain. One is because the characters are unstable and the situation arguably is less unstable. Or the characters are fine and they are in a situation that is teetering about. Okay, that's two very basic components in comparison that could be different. More fine-grained components of what is unstable. Is it about emotions? Is it about information, knowledge? Is it about physical danger? Is it about metaphysics? Is it sociological, or is it about money? Or, all those just are super, super nuanced and could vary from game to game in terms of their parameters, or could vary within a given game depending on that particular setup. Circle of Hands is, again, a pretty good example, I think, in that you are rolling for certain things, then you make choices about them, and then you kind of integrate the roles and the choices in a fashion where okay, well, this is the situation they've run into. Well, anyway, so it says, for the Q&A, could you say something about this? How one gets to the core of what's needed. Game preparation that has part of game design. I guess that's partly a matter of, now, and it specifically references my games. Okay, in my games, I am concerned with the overall situation as a playable entity, and different people have different jobs in the conduct of it. And the trouble is that it's very difficult to get across, as I hope I demonstrated with the skull point discussion, it's very difficult to get across that you are not delivering the story in its steps and chapters. Even if the mechanics do include steps and chapters, there's a great deal of things that remain unknown. you can nail down, of all the plethora of things to be imagined, characters, non-characters, non-player characters, player characters, backstories, God knows what. Of all the things you can nail down, they could be anything. But the things that are not nailed down, that can change, could be anything. It just matters that you have some of each. And the idea that that is part of the game system is non-trivial. The Phenomena course drives into that point quite a bit, that the known and the unknown, the stable and the unstable, in whatever components we're talking about, whether they're in the characters' hearts or whether they are in the monsters lurking around where the characters are wandering, whatever, is actually a critical aspect of the experience of play. That two games that are very different in this regard could have the same resolution mechanics and they would be different games. So as many games just say, according to Christopher, just say prep something, anything you like, or just do that GM thing GMs usually do. Now, that's true, and I have a good name for that. It's called bad design. It doesn't mean that it turns the game master into a puppet of the game designer's notions of what their game is supposed to be like. The procedures can include a great deal of things you do decide. It is your job to decide that part, either before or during play. But the point is that it is systemic how you do that at the table. It will be systemic how you do that at the table. If the game text offers you nothing about it, well, then it just does. It offers nothing about it, which means to complete the game design, you have to figure out how you're going to do it. That's true. But since that context has everything to do with whether your resolution mechanics inside it are any good, not to have some sort of perspective about this in terms of an instructional text is basically dropping the ball. Now, this is kind of interesting. Then how come I'm, disenchanted with this and enchanted with that? Isn't this the nothing and this the something? No, I don't think so. Because there's such a thing as how much is actually provided in a text. Remember, texts are not rules. Texts are not rules. Rules are going to be what we do. And insofar as a text makes it possible for you to be doing what you do, it's a good text. There's also such a thing as a text that basically elbows you in the eye and says, it doesn't matter. This is what you deliver. Your job is to read this and get this to them. And that is not the same thing as instructions. That is anti-instruction. So, in many ways, having the characters in the position in Final Days at Skull Point of trying to get this clan together and deal with its internal troubles so that this clan will now be on the side of Callier Starbrow in her mission against the Lunars. That's the kind of instruction I'm talking about, which is actually destructive to the content of playing this situation, which only makes the best sense when it is your community. You're discovering your backstory, your own grandfathers, your own uncles, your own aunts, your own mom, and you are finding out about this place you live in. My hack of RuneQuest, the kind of dark and brambly scary one that I played for a while a few years ago and really liked, took the rules, which have very basic starting characters with very poor skills, teenagers, and turned that up to 11, was very successful. This kind of thing, where you wander from place to place, often isn't. And I will cite, in fact, Dogs in the Vineyard, which I find, in order to conceive of playing, needs more of that move in, behave normally, instead of being these super agents who show up with their guns pointed up, looking for the trouble. There's a problem around here. I can smell it. Who? You shake this person. You, what's going on around here? Stuff like that. Hopefully that was a helpful response. Kind of nice that all these questions are sort of, integrating with one another all of a sudden. Finally, Pedro asks, have you ever built your character Intruder with Champions Now? Among the Comics Madness posts in which you built Intruder with several systems, you also did it with Champions 3rd edition. And then you mentioned a future post in which you would use Champions Now in other more recent games. But I think you never did that post. No, I didn't. I ended up, I think, with 9 posts about Intruder. And I had 2 more. And they're actually in draft at WordPress, sitting there at my section of the site. One took Intruder through a whole bunch more games of the last decade or so. A whole bunch, too. Some well-known, some not so well-known. And it included Champions Now. And so, yes, I have that Champions Now version sitting around. I might want to revisit it. I mean, I haven't looked at it for a little while. It's been quite a while since I posted it at the blog. But I was happy with it at the time. And then there was to be a final post that looked back on the whole thing and discussed the nature of basically creating characters in the idiom of superheroes and what basically is or isn't functional in regard to role-playing. Fascinating stuff. Would have made a great thing. All 11 posts, I think, would have been, an amazing thing, he says. I wore out. The effort involved was immense. And just couldn't bring myself to grunt the character through all the different rules of the remaining 6 or 7 games. And some of them are done and sitting around, on the character sheets, waiting for, scanned and sitting there as PDFs in the WordPress, waiting for those posts. But I ran out of momentum. To answer the question, yes, Champions Now was much better suited for Intruder, mainly because there's more, what's the word I want? There's less punch available for a starting character, but since it's being written as a villain, I actually took it up to about the maximum, which is 260 points. And that it was perfect for all the situations too, because he's just overflowing with situations, and therefore it was real, you're like, oh, well, this, and this, and it was very nice. But that's not too much of a surprise. I was writing the Intruder comics and talking about Intruder as I was developing the game, sort of a match made in heaven, and it's not very difficult. Whether I'll share that at some point here, I don't know. Some strange part of me, still looks at those posts and goes, you really ought to finish that. You really ought to make that series of posts into like an activity at its play. Right. This is the biggest, deepest comparative swath of superhero role playing that has ever been done. Don't lose that. Get back to that. Well, I might. I'm going to need some more context, sense of support for doing that one day. If people are interested, let's talk maybe about organizing that sometime. The basic answer is yeah. Champions Now busts out a pretty fine Intruder. And that's exciting. I love the character. Hello, Scott Lemine, author of the character, co-author of the character, I suppose. And he deserves it. And Scott's input, which is brilliant, fascinated, tormented, and reluctant, and fraught with intensity, and talented. Skilled is the right word. Artists hate to be called talented. Skilled. That input really shouldn't be, betrayed and left fallow in this fashion. All right. Thank you very much. Whole hour. Lucky you. Take care. Let's do this again. This is helping me think, with any luck, generating more conversations.